A bright red notice. Not the usual flyers or junk mail you get when someone's trying to sell you something. No, this was different. The bold letters screamed, "Official notice of violation, immediate action required." I stopped dead in my tracks. I walked closer, a sinking feeling in my gut. I've been on this ranch for years, had built it from the ground up after I left the Navy. But as I peeled the notice off the gate, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Apparently, according to some organization I'd never heard of, HOA, they claimed my property was in violation of several regulations. They listed everything from improper livestock containment to unauthorized fencing, along with a $3,000 fine. They were demanding that I pay it within a week or face immediate action. The notice was signed by someone named Karen Whitaker, president of the Greater Simmons Valley HOA. I had no idea what Simmons Valley even was, let alone what HOA they were talking about. As far as I was concerned, my ranch was fine. My fences were up to code. The goats were contained. Everything was operating smoothly. So why was I getting this notice? The more I read, the more confused I became. They listed rules I had never agreed to, fines that seemed outrageous, and threats of eviction and forced compliance if I didn't comply with their demands. And to top it all off, the notice said they'd be sending enforcers out to inspect my property if I didn't pay up. This wasn't just some bureaucratic nonsense. This was an attack. But what really got my attention? The idea of enforcers coming to my ranch. And that's when the red flags really started popping up. I stood there for a moment, staring at the notice in my hand. My blood started to boil. Who were these people to think they could just walk onto my land and demand anything from me? My family had worked this land for generations. I wasn't about to let some HOA that I'd never even heard of push me around. But the fine print didn't help matters. The notice warned me that if I didn't pay the fine by the end of the week, the HOA would send enforcers to inspect the property. If I failed to comply with their corrections, they'd take further action. It felt like I was being blackmailed by some fly-by-night organization. The more I read, the more the whole thing didn't sit right. This wasn't a normal property violation. The document wasn't from the local county or any legitimate authority. It was a letter from an HOA that, according to everything I knew, didn't have any jurisdiction over my property. I wasn't in Simmons Valley, and as far as I was concerned, I didn't have anything to do with them. Still, the threat of enforcers coming to my ranch hung in the air. The fine was one thing, but the idea of some uninvited strangers walking onto my land was something else entirely. I looked around at my ranch, taking in the land that had been my sanctuary since I left the Navy. It was quiet here. I kept everything in good shape. But now this HOA had decided to come knocking. I wasn't going to let them bully me into paying for something I didn't know. I needed to find out exactly who these people were and if they had any real power behind their threats. I spent the next few hours calling around local government offices, zoning departments, and even a few of my neighbors. No one knew a thing about this Greater Simmons Valley HOA. No one had ever heard of Karen Whitaker. And that's when the suspicion turned to certainty. This was a scam, a bold attempt to intimidate me into giving them money I didn't know. It was time to prepare for the worst. The next morning, as I was sipping my coffee and strategizing my next move, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pair of unmarked vehicles rolled up the driveway, their windows tinted so dark I couldn't make out who was inside. I narrowed my eyes as the cars came to a stop at the edge of the property. Then the door opened. Two men stepped out, both dressed in tactical gear. One of them was holding a clipboard, the other had a sidearm strapped to his belt. They looked like they belonged in a military movie, but this wasn't some Hollywood set. These guys were here for something real, something I wasn't going to let happen without a fight. I stood up from the porch, my instincts kicking in. I wasn't just any rancher. I wasn't just someone who would back down at the first sign of trouble. I've been through too much in my life, and I've been trained to handle situations like this. As the two men walked toward me, I took in the details: too much military-style gear, no identification, no badges, no markings to suggest they were legitimate law enforcement. These weren't enforcers, they were imposters. But they were coming onto my land like they owned it, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The man holding the clipboard was the first to speak, his voice flat and businesslike. "Sir, we are here to conduct a visual inspection on behalf of the Greater Simmons Valley HOA. We've received complaints about your property." I raised an eyebrow. Complaints? From who? I don't even live in Simmons Valley. Who are you people? He didn't flinch, and the guy with the sidearm shifted slightly, making sure to stand just close enough to show he wasn't messing around. Sir, we don't need to explain ourselves, the clipboard guy said, his voice growing a little more authoritative. You are in violation of HOA regulations, and we're here to confirm compliance. I couldn't help but laugh, the absurdity of it all hitting me. I'm in violation, and you're going to check my property to confirm compliance? Without even telling me what violations you're talking about. You're out of your minds. The man with the clipboard made a move toward me, but I stepped forward, blocking his path. You're not going anywhere until you tell me exactly who you are and what gives you the right to be here. The other man placed a hand near his sidearm, a subtle threat I wasn't going to miss. But I didn't flinch. I had been in much tighter situations than this. You're trespassing, I said, my voice cold and firm. Unless you're law enforcement or have an official warrant, you're not stepping foot on my land. Not today. They looked at each other, confused for a second. This wasn't how they expected it to go, and it wasn't going to get any better for them. The two men exchanged a quick glance, clearly not expecting resistance. The one with the clipboard tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. The one with the sidearm shifted his stance again, but this time it was more of a nervous tick than an actual threat. You don't understand, the clipboard guy said, his tone changing slightly. We're here under expanded authority from the Greater Simmons Valley HOA. We're authorized to inspect your property as part of a compliance review. I shook my head, the skepticism written all over my face. Expanded authority? Is that what you're calling this nonsense? You can't just waltz onto my land and start inspecting things because you decided to make up some rules. What the hell gives you that kind of power? The guy with the clipboard seemed taken aback by my response. He wasn't used to being questioned, and I wasn't about to let him think he could pull this off without some pushback. We have the right to inspect your property. The HOA has jurisdiction here, he stammered, clearly rattled. The HOA has jurisdiction? I repeated, the words coming out slow and deliberate. You do realize you can't just claim authority because you feel like it, right? There's no legal standing for what you're doing. And as far as I'm concerned, you're trespassing on my property. At this point, I could see the cracks in their facade starting to show. They didn't have anything official backing them up. No badges. No credentials. No legal documents. Nothing. Just a bunch of guys trying to intimidate me into submission. I took a few steps closer, my voice steady and measured. You've got no power here. And if you try to step foot on my land again, I'll be calling the sheriff. You'll be on your way to jail for trespassing and impersonating law enforcement. The clipboard guy faltered, glancing at his partner, who seemed less certain than before. They had come here expecting a quick and easy victory, but now they were realizing they were up against someone who wasn't going to fold under pressure. I wasn't about to let these imposters ruin the peace I had worked so hard for. The two men stood there, frozen for a moment, as if trying to process the reality of the situation. They weren't used to being challenged. Not like this. Their eyes darted between each other, but neither of them made a move. I could see the tension building, and I knew I needed to act quickly. This wasn't just a confrontation over a piece of paper. This was a test of control, and I wasn't about to lose. I pulled out my phone and started snapping pictures, photos of their vehicles, their faces, their unmarked uniforms, and the clearly fake badges hanging loosely from their necks. I didn't trust these guys as far as I could throw them. They'd made a mistake by showing up here, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it without proper evidence. All right, you two, I said, lowering the camera and locking eyes with both of them. I've got enough here to make a case. You want to keep playing this game? Fine. But I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. They didn't respond at first, but the one with the clipboard, clearly losing his patience, stepped forward again. You're making a big mistake, he said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice now. We're just following orders. If you don't cooperate, we'll report you for obstruction. I raised an eyebrow and crossed my arms. Obstruction? You're on my property without consent, and you're claiming to represent an HOA that's never been authorized in this area. If anyone's obstructing anything, it's you. And I'm going to make sure the right people hear about it. They looked at each other again, their faces starting to turn from confident to uncertain. The game was changing, and they were realizing I wasn't just some rancher they could scare into submission. I've been through worse than this. I've been trained to stay calm in the face of real danger, and this was nothing. The tension hung in the air, but I could feel the shift happening. They were no longer the ones in control. They were starting to see that they'd made a big mistake by choosing the wrong ranch to mess with. I could feel the pressure building as the two men stood there, clearly unsure of their next move. They were running out of options, and I knew they'd either back down or escalate. Either way, I was ready. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just a rancher. I wasn't someone they could intimidate into compliance. I wasn't going to roll over because some fake enforcers showed up at my gate. I was a former Navy SEAL, trained to handle high-pressure situations with precision, calm, and focus. I've been in tight spots before, ones far more dangerous than this. So as I stood there in front of them, I felt nothing but a cool, methodical calm wash over me. This was just another operation, one where the goal was to neutralize the threat and protect what was mine. I sized them up quickly. They weren't trained for this. Their body language was giving them away. They were nervous, out of their element. The man with the clipboard kept glancing toward his partner, looking for reassurance, but the partner didn't seem so confident either. This wasn't their first rodeo, but it sure as hell was mine. "You two have no idea what you're getting into," I said, my voice low but steady. "You've come to the wrong ranch to try and pull this stunt. I've been trained to assess and respond in situations like this, and I'm not backing down. You're not here to enforce anything. You're here to bully and intimidate. And it's not going to work." I took another step forward, but my stance was calm and controlled. I wasn't threatening them. I was simply asserting that this wasn't going to go the way they planned. The man with the clipboard opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack up your little act, get back in your cars, and leave. You're not stepping foot on my land. If you want to play this game, you'll do it by the book. But make no mistake, if you cross the line again, I'll be calling the sheriff, and this time, I'll make sure they know exactly what you're up to." The taller enforcer took a half step back, his hand twitching near his holster. I could see it in his eyes. He was used to having people back down, used to scaring them with a badge that didn't belong to anyone. But that wasn't going to work here. I wasn't just another person to push around. I was trained to face down real threats, and these too. They were nothing more than minor annoyances in comparison. I could see the hesitation in their eyes. They weren't sure how to handle someone who wasn't intimidated by their authority and wasn't willing to fold under pressure. They probably thought they could walk into my life, demand whatever they wanted, and get away with it. But that's not how this was going to play out. I could tell they weren't prepared for this level of resistance. They thought they were dealing with a rancher who would back down. What they didn't know was that I'd spent years in situations where the stakes were far higher than some fake HOA enforcers trying to bully me into paying a fine. I kept my movements controlled and purposeful. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't angry. I was doing exactly what I had been trained to do: assess the situation, identify the threat, and take appropriate action. The first move? I already made it. By standing my ground, I put the ball in their court. Now, I had to make sure they knew exactly what they were up against. I took a deep breath, calculating my next steps. The sheriff's office wasn't far, and I knew I had a good rapport with a few of the deputies. I could have made the call right now, but I didn't want to jump the gun. I needed to make sure they understood exactly who they were dealing with before I escalated things. The enforcers were clearly stalling, trying to regain their composure. The taller one, probably the more senior of the two, started pacing back and forth, clearly rattled. His partner, the one with the clipboard, had that I'm in over my head look, and I could see him frantically flipping through his papers as if he was looking for something that would give him the upper hand. I took another step forward, slowly and deliberately. My body language was calm, but I made sure they knew I was fully in control of the situation. "You're not leaving until I get some answers," I said, my voice quiet but firm. They exchanged glances, then looked at me like I was the one who had lost my mind. "What do you want from us?" the clipboard guy asked, his voice betraying the uncertainty he was trying so hard to hide. I let out a long exhale. "I want you to leave. I want you to tell me exactly who you're working for and why you think you can intimidate me into complying with your fake rules. And most importantly, I want to know what happens if you don't leave here right now. Because I'll be damned if you're going to get away with this." They didn't move, but I knew I had them on the ropes. The power dynamic had shifted. Now it was my turn to call the shots. I wasn't playing around anymore. I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed the sheriff's department. I knew the deputy on the other end, had worked with him on a few ranch-related matters before. Luke Callahan. He was solid, and he'd back me up if things escalated. As the phone rang, I kept my eyes on the two enforcers. They weren't saying anything now, their earlier bluster completely gone. I wasn't sure if they realized it yet, but I was done letting them push me around. "Luke," I said as soon as he picked up, my voice calm but urgent, "I need backup. I've got two guys here claiming to be enforcement officers for the Greater Simmons Valley HOA. They've got no credentials, no real authority, and they're trying to intimidate me into compliance." There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a low chuckle. "You've got fake cops on your property? Sounds like they picked the wrong ranch to mess with." I didn't laugh. "They've got unmarked vehicles, tactical gear, clipboards, the whole bit. They're claiming to be here to enforce codes that don't even apply to my land. I'm holding my ground, but I could use some backup." "I'm on my way," Luke said, and I could hear the determination in his voice. "I'll get some deputies out there to handle this. Hold tight." I ended the call and turned my attention back to the enforcers. They hadn't moved, still standing there, trying to regain their confidence. But I could see the cracks. They were starting to realize that I wasn't bluffing. "We're waiting for the real law to show up," I said, my voice sharp now. "You got about 5 minutes before they arrive. And when they do, I'm making sure they know exactly what's going on here." The taller enforcer looked over at his partner, but neither of them made a move. They were stuck. They knew they were out of their depth now. And the clock was ticking. The tension in the air thickened as we all waited. I could tell the two enforcers were getting antsy. Their confident facade had cracked, and now they were looking for any way out of this mess. I watched as the taller one pulled out his phone, probably trying to get in touch with someone, but I wasn't worried. Luke and the sheriff's office were on their way, and it wouldn't be long before they'd have to answer for this stunt. I kept my eyes on the enforcers, waiting for any sign that they might back off. Just as I was about to step forward and say something else, one of the enforcers, clipboard guy, suddenly straightened up. "We're here to enforce HOA compliance," he said, a little too defensively. "You don't have to make this harder than it needs to be. We're just doing our job." I scoffed. "Your job?" I repeated, taking a step closer. "You don't have a job here. You're trespassing on my property without any real authority. And I'm about to make sure that the people who sent you here are going to regret it." The taller enforcer's hand twitched near his sidearm again, and I knew he was getting ready for a move, but he wasn't going to get the chance. Just then, the sound of engines revving echoed from down the driveway. I turned, watching as Luke's sheriff's cruiser pulled in, flanked by two other marked cars. The cavalry had arrived. The enforcers stiffened, clearly realizing they were about to face the real law. Luke stepped out of the cruiser, his presence commanding. He took one look at the situation and didn't even bother acknowledging the enforcers directly. Instead, he walked straight up to me with a calm but authoritative demeanor. "Everything all right here, Mike?" he asked. I nodded, a smirk crossing my face. "Yeah, everything's fine. These two guys just wanted to have a little chat about some bogus HOA rules, but I'm afraid they're a little out of their league." Luke turned his attention to the enforcers, his gaze hardening. "Gentlemen," he said coolly, "you're trespassing on private property. I'm going to need you to pack up and leave now." The taller enforcer looked like he was about to argue, but Luke's deputies were already moving into position, their presence making it clear that this was no longer a situation they could control. One of the deputies approached the enforcers, pulling out a set of official forms. "You're not authorized to enforce any codes on this property," the deputy said, his voice stern. "You need to leave or face legal consequences." The two men exchanged glances, and I could see the fear creeping into their eyes now. This was no longer a game. The enforcers were realizing they had pushed their luck too far, and now they were going to pay for it. Without saying another word, they turned and began to retreat to their vehicles, knowing full well that their bluff had been called. Luke didn't even look at them as they walked away. Instead, he turned back to me with a grin. "I figured I'd be getting a call from you soon. Good thing you didn't take them on alone." I chuckled. Yeah, I had a feeling these guys wouldn't be too easy to get rid of. The sheriff's deputies stayed a moment longer, ensuring the enforcers were on their way out, and then it was over. The threat was gone. My ranch was safe, and I'd made sure the fake enforcers knew they weren't welcome here. Once the fake enforcers had driven off, I took a deep breath and looked around. The tension had finally broken, but I knew this wasn't the end. I had to make sure these guys, and anyone else who thought they could pull a stunt like this, knew that this wasn't a place for intimidation. Luke and I stood in front of my barn, the morning sun starting to peek over the horizon. I had a lot of work to do now, but I wasn't leaving until I had a clear plan. Mike, Luke said, his voice low but serious, this is bigger than just some rogue HOA. They're playing a dangerous game, and it's only a matter of time before they try something else. I nodded. I figured as much. They didn't come here for the small stuff. This was a test. They wanted to see how far they could push, and I don't think they expected someone to push back. You're right, Luke said, glancing over at the empty driveway where the enforcers had parked. These guys aren't part of any official HO, and that's the real issue. They've been using fraud to pressure people into paying fines they don't owe. And I've got a bad feeling that Karen Whitaker, whoever she is, has a lot to do with this. I agreed. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the HOA was just a front for something much larger. The use of fake enforcers, the intimidation tactics, and the lack of real legal authority. It all pointed to fraud. I'll file the report, I said, already thinking about the paperwork I need to get started. But we need to hit them where it hurts. This isn't just about protecting my property. It's about making sure they can't pull this crap on anyone else. Luke gave me a nod. Exactly. Let's get everything in order, and we'll take it from there. If we can expose this, they won't be able to do it again. I pulled out my phone, already dialing the local authorities to report the incident and make sure there was an official record of what had happened. The fake enforcers would need to be investigated, and I wasn't going to let them just vanish into the ether. I looked over at Luke, determination in my eyes. They made their move, but I'm not letting them get away with it. Not here. Not on my land. Luke gave me a smile. I'll make sure we've got the backup we need. We're going to take this all the way. The fight wasn't over yet. The real battle had only just begun. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and strategy. I made sure to file the official report with the sheriff's department, detailing everything that had happened with the fake enforcers. The sheriff's office took it seriously, especially after Luke got involved and backed up my story. We couldn't afford to let this kind of thing slide. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized how deep the fraud went. It wasn't just some rogue enforcers trying to make a quick buck. It was a calculated scheme, carefully orchestrated to pressure people into paying fines under false pretenses. And the person behind it all? Karen Whitaker. Luke and I spent hours going over the documents I had, cross-referencing them with known legal protocols for HOA actions. It didn't take long to figure out that Karen wasn't operating within any legal boundaries. There was no record of her HOA actually existing in any formal capacity. No registered documents, no legal filings. It was all a facade, a carefully constructed lie to force people to comply with arbitrary rules. Luke said one afternoon as we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, I'd done a little digging on my own. Karen Whitaker doesn't even seem to live in Simmons Valley. And her so-called HOA? It's just a front for a bigger operation. She's been using fake enforcers like those two clowns to intimidate landowners, then offering them help with compliance for a price. I felt a knot in my stomach. So, she's been using fake enforcers to bully people into paying for nothing? Luke nodded. Exactly. And I think the real plan is to get people to sign over property under duress. They create the violations, scare the hell out of people, and then offer to settle the issue for a fee. Or, in some cases, by getting the property owners to sign documents transferring their land. I ran a hand through my hair, my anger bubbling up. She's trying to steal people's land. Luke gave me a grim look. That's exactly what she's been doing. And she's been getting away with it for a while. I stood up, pacing around the room. We can't let this go on. Not just for me, this is happening to other people too. I can't sit back and let this fraud continue. Luke picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts. We've got a few people on the inside who can help. We need to gather more evidence, then we'll take it to the district attorney. But we can't do it without solid proof. I nodded, determination flooding my veins. Let's get everything we need. I'm not backing down from this, and neither should anyone else she's tried to scam. We spent the next few weeks gathering evidence. Luke and I tracked down more victims of Karen Whitaker's fraud, People who had been threatened by the fake enforcers and pressured into signing over property or paying ridiculous fines. Each one had a story to tell, and with every story, the scope of the scam became clearer. We collected documents, recorded phone calls, and got statements from neighbors who had seen the enforcers in action. The more we dug, the more I realized how far Karen had gone to manipulate and scare people into submission. This wasn't just a couple of mistakes, it was a full-fledged operation to seize land through deception and intimidation. I called in some favors from a few friends I'd made over the years, lawyers, investigators, and even some of my old contacts from the military. They helped me piece together a solid case, one that would expose Karen and her team for what they truly were, criminals. The day of the showdown came when Luke called me, his voice tight with urgency. "Mike, we've got everything we need. The DA's on board. We're making the arrest today." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment I had been working toward. The moment Karen Whitaker would have to face the consequences of her actions. By the time the sheriff's department rolled up to Karen's office, which turned out to be a rented space in an industrial park, I was standing with Luke, ready for the final confrontation. The deputies had gathered all the evidence, and Luke had a warrant in hand. We walked in with our heads held high, the legal authority backing us up. Karen was sitting behind a desk when we entered, her face going pale as soon as she saw Luke. She had a brief moment of hesitation, like she was trying to calculate her next move, but she knew she was caught. Luke didn't waste any time. "Karen Whitaker, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, impersonating law enforcement, and several other charges related to your fake HOA operation." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak at first. She knew it was over. The jig was up. "You can't do this," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I have power connections, people who will protect me." Luke shook his head. "You've been taking advantage of people for far too long. This ends today."